There's a moment in every life, sometimes in the hush of dawn, sometimes in the trembling wake of loss, when the world suddenly quiets. The noise of routine, the motion of days, the voice of ambition all fall away. And in that hush, something ancient calls. Not with words, but with presence. Not with volume, but with gravity. It's the question that waits behind every birth and lingers after every funeral. The one question that no empire of science or creed has yet silenced. What happens when we die? This is not a book of answers. This is a book of remembrance. Not of what you've forgotten with your mind, but what your soul always knew before the noise, before the fear, before the forgetting. You may have felt it already. That quiet ache when staring into the night sky. That chill when hearing of someone's passing, even if you didn't know them. That flicker of recognition when reading words from another age, another culture, as if someone wrote them directly for you. If so, you're not alone. You never were. This work is a guided contemplation, a journey into what may await beyond the veil of the physical. It draws from a well of sources, ancient scriptures, modern insight, mystical visions, and a revelatory cosmology known as the Urantia Book, a profound volume that offers one of the most intricate and transcendent visions of the soul's destiny ever written. But even so, this is not a doctrine to believe in. It is an invitation to remember, feel, and awaken. There is a kind of silence that is not empty but full. It is the silence one hears after the last breath of a loved one has faded, or in the stillness that follows a profound realization, the silence between the heartbeat of one life and the next. In that silence, some hear fear, others hear peace, but a few hear the beginning of a memory. You're not a body with a soul. You are a soul, ancient, radiant, and persistent, temporarily wearing a body. You were not born when your body emerged from the womb, nor will you vanish when it returns to dust. Your true essence stretches beyond the constraints of time and death, rooted in something immeasurable, something divine. Across cultures and centuries, mystics and prophets have spoken of the same unseen thread, a journey that continues beyond the visible. The Bhagavad Gita whispers of the Atman, the imperishable soul. Plato described the soul's ascent to the realm of forms. Jesus of Nazareth spoke of life eternal and a father's house with many rooms. The Sufis sing of returning to the beloved. And the Urantia Book describes a cosmology so vast and intimate, it places your very soul at the heart of a universe in motion. They do not contradict one another. They complete one another. Truth, when real, does not compete. It resonates. And in that resonance, something within you stirs. What if you have always known there is more? Not as a belief handed down, but as a truth embedded within you, like a seed waiting for the light. This book, this experience is not meant to plant that seed. It is here to water it. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is time for you to remember why you came here in the first place. We often speak of death as an ending, but what if it is a doorway, and not one that closes, but one that opens? What if death is not the end of life, but the gentle undoing of illusion? What if we do not lose ourselves in dying, but finally find what was most real all along? The world teaches you to fear the end. Spirit invites you to embrace the beginning. This is a journey not of theories, but of living truths, a path woven from light, forged through experience, and shaped by the fire of your own choices. The soul does not survive by accident. It survives by consent, by resonance with truth, by alignment with the divine fragment within you, the indwelling whisper of God, the adjuster of thought. Whether you name it intuition, higher self, guardian presence, or divine voice, that sacred essence within you knows the way forward. It remembers who you truly are. It remembers where you came from, and it knows where you are going, even if you do not. This book will not rush to conclusions. It will walk beside you, gently, steadily, offering insight, story, vision, and silence. It will draw from scripture and science, from mysticism and metaphysics, from ancient prayers and future revelations. It will speak with the voice of a companion, not a preacher, because you do not need to be told what to believe. You need only space to recognize what your soul already knows. So breathe, let go. Step with me now into the stillness beyond fear. There is a place within you that cannot die. It is older than your name, deeper than your story, and stronger than any night. And that is where we begin. Chapter 1, The Soul, Seed of Eternity. Before we can speak of eternity, we must remember what is most alive within us now. There is something in you that listens in silence while the world speaks in noise. It does not rush. It does not clamor for validation. It does not age with the body or diminish with defeat. You have met it in moments of stillness, in the space between thoughts, in the ache of beauty, in the pause between sorrow and surrender. It is the one part of you that has never lied, never left, and never broken. This is your soul. But what is the soul truly? The word itself has been used by sages and singers, scientists and saints across centuries and languages. Some have tried to measure it. Others have tried to name it. Yet no measurement, no name can contain it. For the soul is not a thing. It is a becoming, a living expression of who you are when all else is stripped away. You are not born with a fully formed soul. Contrary to what some traditions suggest, your soul is not simply given, it is grown. It begins as potential, as a seed planted in the fertile field of experience. And just as a seed needs water, light, and time to become a tree, your soul requires choice, love, and spiritual intention to come into full being. The soul forms in the sacred space between mind and spirit. Mind alone can analyze, recall, and imagine, but it cannot make something eternal. Spirit is the divine essence, perfect, unchanging, but it does not evolve. It is the interaction between the two, the tension between your human striving and your divine pull, that gives birth to the soul. It is the canvas upon which your life is painted, not in facts, but in meanings, not in achievements, but in how you choose to meet each moment. The soul is shaped by your response to love, to suffering, to wonder. It is formed not by what happens to you, but by what you become in the face of what happens. In this way, the soul is not just your inner core, it is your truest story. And yet, so many mistake other voices within for the soul. The ego, ever hungry, calls itself I. The personality, complex and reactive, plays the role of self. The mind, fast, brilliant, afraid, believes it is in control. But none of these can endure beyond the grave. They are masks worn for a time, costumes for this act of existence. When the play ends, they fall away. The soul, however, continues. The moment a soul begins is not marked by a cry, a certificate, or a name. It is marked by a decision, often unnoticed, yet cosmically profound. A moment when the human being, however faintly, chooses truth over comfort, chooses love over fear, chooses to reach upward towards something higher, rather than falling back into the gravity of self. In that moment, a shift occurs. A flicker of spiritual birth begins in the space between the mind's questioning and the spirit's quiet invitation. And from this sacred tension, the soul is born. The Urantia revelation speaks of this not as an automatic event, but as a sacred co-creation. The soul is not imposed upon us, it is authored with us. It is formed gradually, as the adjuster of thought, that mysterious indwelling fragment of God interacts with our choices, our yearnings, our struggles. Each time we lean into truth, when we forgive, when we act selflessly not out of duty, but out of genuine goodness, the soul grows. It thickens. It becomes more real. This is why two people can live the same number of years, but emerge with vastly different levels of inner being. One may have wandered far without ever truly living. Another may have suffered deeply, but in doing so, discovered the strength of spirit. The soul is not measured in time, but in depth. Not in years, but in how deeply one has allowed oneself to love, to awaken, to trust. The ego resists this process, for it is grounded in preservation. It fears dissolution, sees death as annihilation, clings to power and control. The mind, brilliant and useful, can become a tyrant when it believes itself to be the totality of self. Personality, crafted through experience and environment, adapts and reacts, but does not remember eternity. Only the soul holds that memory, not as information, but as a silent vibration, a gravitational pull towards something greater than the sum of your parts. And here lies the paradox. The soul is both who you are and who you are becoming. It is a field in which your divine potential takes root. It is not separate from you, but it is not fully you yet. It is the part of you that can become eternal, but only if you choose to let it. Your soul will not survive because you desire it to. It will survive because your life harmonized in some essential way with truth, beauty, and goodness. This harmony is not perfection, it is sincerity. The soul responds not to appearances, but to intention. A single moment of genuine surrender, a whispered prayer in the dark, a silent act of compassion. These carry more spiritual weight than years of ritual performed without love. And this is why children, the broken, the silent seekers, those who feel unworthy, are often closer to the gates of eternity than they know. To ask when the soul begins to survive is to ask when love becomes real, when choice becomes sacred, when life ceases to be about surviving and begins to be about meaning. For survival of the soul is not the same as continuation of consciousness. It is the persistence of identity in alignment with God's will. It is the fusion, eventual and sublime, of the human and the divine. And when that fusion draws near, when the soul has become substantial enough, beautiful enough, brave enough to unite with its adjuster, that fragment of infinite spirit, then, and only then, is it guaranteed eternal life. Until then, you are in process. You are unfolding. You are becoming real. To live a life aware of the soul is to begin dying before death, not in fear, but in freedom. For it is only when the lesser identities are surrendered that the deeper self can emerge. The ego, like a flame flickering in the wind, resists this undoing. It fights for center stage, but the soul does not argue. It waits. It listens. It learns through silence. It becomes through surrender. This becoming is not passive. It is the most courageous act a human can engage in, the act of inner transformation. When you choose to love without condition, when you forgive when you could hate, when you stand still in the face of your own emptiness without running, something immortal is shaped. A vibration is recorded in the fabric of the universe, not by angels watching from above, but by the very structure of reality that responds to soul. The soul is not saved by avoiding darkness, but by walking through it and still choosing light. It is not preserved by knowledge, but by alignment. an inner gravity that pulls you steadily toward truth, even when you don't understand it. You may not feel holy, you may not feel wise, but if there is within you the smallest whisper that longs to be good, that is your soul speaking. In the cosmology of Urantia, this soul is the embryo of your eternal identity, birthed through mortal experience, guided by an indwelling fragment of God. It is not separate from the divine. It is not waiting to be judged. It is waiting to be unified. Its journey is not one of reward and punishment, but of recognition and reunion, a return not to where you once were, but to who you truly are. And this return is not far away. It begins now. Each day offers you the chance to choose reality over illusion, growth over stagnation, love over apathy. Each moment of conscious decision adds another thread to the tapestry of your soul, a design woven not with ink or paint, but with being itself. No one else can live your soul into existence. That task is yours, intimate, sacred, and eternal. So when does the soul begin to survive? The answer is almost too quiet for words. It survives the moment you begin to truly live. Not merely exist, not merely function, but live with awareness of your spiritual identity. Live with the courage to change, to seek, to serve. The soul survives when it stops being an idea and becomes your center. It survives when you begin to identify with that which cannot die. And when the time comes, when the body fails, when the last breath leaves, when the world falls away, it is not the end. It is not the loss of self. It is the letting go of all that is not self. It is the lifting of a veil, and the soul, if real and radiant, will rise into a world that has been waiting all along. There is a silence beyond this life, not of absence, but of arrival. And it is toward that silence that we now turn. Chapter 2, Death, the passage into the invisible. Death arrives quietly for most, not with a thunderclap or great proclamation, but with a soft release, like a tide receding from the shore. To those standing nearby, it may seem sudden or cruel, but to the soul that has begun to awaken, death is not an enemy. It is a horizon. We have been taught to see death as annihilation, a curtain drawn, a signal that the story has ended. But what if death is not the end of the story, but merely the end of a chapter? What if it is the most natural thing your body will ever do, and the most extraordinary thing your soul will ever experience? Biologically, death is a process. The heart slows, the breath shallows, the brain flickers and fades. The body, long a faithful companion, begins its return to the earth. Cells collapse, warmth withdraws, systems shut down in a final orchestration. Yet as the body releases its grip on life, something else awakens, not in the brain but beyond it, not in the body but behind it. Something watches the ending without ending itself. That watcher is consciousness, no longer rooted in flesh. And in the teachings that whisper through centuries, from ancient Egypt to Tibetan monasteries, from the Psalms of David to the revelations of Urantia, it is said that at the moment of death, consciousness does not die. It detaches. It separates. Like a boat leaving the dock, it drifts gently into a dimension beyond material space, guided not by sight or sound, but by resonance. The soul, if it has become real enough, if it has gathered weight through love and truth, will survive this detachment. And in that sacred moment, the veil begins to lift. To the one passing, there is no pain, only surrender. There may be light. There may be silence. There may be a sense of floating, of being welcomed, of returning. Some describe seeing loved ones. Others recall nothing at all. But in the cosmology we are unfolding here, the soul does not awaken immediately in another world. It enters a pause, a suspension, known not as purgatory, but as rest. The Urantia teachings call this state the sleep of the soul, a suspension of self-awareness between worlds. There is no dreaming, no suffering, only stillness, held in divine care, waiting for reanimation in a new realm. Time, as we understand it, loses meaning. 1,000 years may pass on earth, and to the sleeping soul, it would feel like a single breath. But the soul is not alone in this passage. There are presences, unseen, luminous, ancient, who attend to this journey. They are not imagined. They are not symbolic. They are real. Throughout the ages, there have been whispers of presence at the moment of death, subtle, luminous forms said to stand near as the final breath escapes. Eyes once dimmed by pain sometimes grow wide just before passing, as though glimpsing something unseen by the living. A calm may settle, inexplicable to those around. In many traditions, this presence has been named angels, guides, messengers. And in the revelation offered by the Urantia cosmology, they are real, seraphic beings of light and order, guardians of transition who neither judge nor intervene, but accompany. These seraphim are not figments of mythology. They are ancient intelligences devoted to the orchestration of soul transport and care, appointed not by magic, but by a universe of love that leaves no soul unattended. They do not arrive in spectacle or fire. They come gently, as familiar as breath, as silent as intuition. Their role is not to awaken or to console, but to carry. They take up the soul, sleeping now in the stillness between worlds, and transport it to the next phase of becoming. They do not force. They do not bind. They serve. It is said that if your soul has chosen survival, if your life has in its essence aligned with the spiritual gravity of truth, however imperfectly, these seraphic guardians will receive the essence of your being and prepare it for transfer to a place where new life begins. That place is not a cloud-filled heaven nor a fiery judgment hall. It is real, structured, evolutionary. It is the first of the 7 mansion worlds. The soul does not awaken in terror or confusion, but in quiet surprise. As if waking from a dream you didn't know you were dreaming. There is a moment of stillness, of gathering. Slowly, the awareness of being returns. Not as it was before, but heightened, clarified, stripped of illusion. There is no pain. There is no body in the way you once knew it. Yet you are you, still aware, still present, still becoming. This awakening, though extraordinary, is not chaotic. It unfolds under the care of celestial administrators, beings long devoted to the shepherding of souls. And although the surroundings may appear unfamiliar, the recognition of truth within them is immediate. There is no doubt that you are in a realm of order and intention. This is no projection of the subconscious. It is no myth. It is the next realm of your journey, not in finality, but in unfolding. In this new beginning, the past is not erased. It is integrated. Your earthly experience is not discarded, but valued, sifted for meaning, refined for wisdom. You begin to see what mattered most and what simply passed. The pain you carried is softened by understanding. The love you gave becomes luminous. You are met not with punishment, but with perspective. There is work to do, growth to undergo, beauty to encounter. But all of it begins here, with awakening, with remembering, with stepping once more into the great journey you thought death had ended. Death is not the opposite of life. It is the veil between expressions of life. And on the other side, you are not less yourself, you are more. What we call death may be one of the most misunderstood events in the arc of existence. It is feared, avoided, mourned, resisted. And yet, to the soul that has begun to awaken, death is not loss. It is the relinquishing of the temporary, the shedding of a skin that no longer fits the evolving self. It is not the end of consciousness, but the shifting of its center. No longer anchored to neurons or blood, consciousness begins to center itself in spirit, refined, clarified, and held in the hands of those who have long prepared for your arrival. As the soul enters the first of the mansion worlds, it does not find chaos, but structure. These realms are not figments of hopeful minds. They are orderly stages of education, healing, and spiritual calibration. The soul is gently reassembled, not as it was, but as it is meant to be, clarified of its illusions, refined of its wounds, prepared for growth that exceeds the constraints of mortality. It learns again, but now with clearer memory and deeper hunger for meaning. The things once forgotten begin to return, not just events, but purpose, not just choices, but the reasons behind them. In this place, the soul does not encounter judgment in the punitive sense. It is not placed on trial before a cosmic tribunal. Rather, it meets itself. It meets the patterns of thought, the vibrations of intention, the substance it became through countless daily decisions. And yet, even this encounter is not meant to shame, but to illuminate. With the guidance of celestial beings, teachers, seraphim, administrators, the soul begins to discern the echoes of divine truth within its own journey. Here, healing begins not by being fixed, but by understanding why the wound existed in the first place. The presence of the seraphim continues long after the soul has arrived. These beings, who once carried the soul through the veil of death, now accompany it through stages of restoration. They do not dictate progress, but encourage it. They do not command growth, but foster it. Each soul is treated not as broken or condemned, but as sacred and becoming. Time here does not bind, it opens. And in this opening, the soul learns not only who it has been, but who it may yet become. Though the surroundings may be unfamiliar, cities not made by human hands, languages not spoken by earthly tongues, lights that do not cast shadows, there's a sense of belonging, as if you have stepped into a place that remembers you more clearly than you remembered yourself. You are not a stranger in a foreign land. You are a soul among souls, each on a journey not of superiority, but of awakening. To die is to be carried. To awaken is to be called. And to live again in the worlds beyond is to be invited to remember everything that death cannot touch: love, truth, courage, and the radiant pull of your eternal origin. You have not passed away. You have passed through. And before you now stretches a horizon that was never really far away. What lies ahead is not finality, but continuation. Not a reward, but a path. Not rest in the sense of stillness, but rest in the sense of purpose rediscovered. The soul, gently stirred from its slumber, stands now at the threshold of its next becoming. And it is to that new morning we now turn. Chapter 3: The Seraphim and the Celestial Care. There are forces that move beside us, not in the glare of spectacle, but in the quietude of love. They walk beside our choices, stand within our losses, watch silently when we falter, and rejoice quietly when we rise. They are not imagined, though unseen. They do not interfere, though ever near. In the cosmology offered by Urantia, they are known not simply as angels, but as seraphim, radiant beings of divine service and unyielding patience, guardians of the soul's journey through space, time, and beyond. Seraphim are not born of flesh nor bound by gravity. They are luminous intelligences created in perfect devotion to ministry, harmony, and order. They do not serve as deities nor demand adoration. They serve, not from obligation, but from purpose so pure that even love, in its highest human form, feels like a whisper compared to their presence. To know the seraphim is to begin to comprehend that you have never been truly alone. From the moment a soul begins to awaken, even faintly, even once, the seraphic presence draws near. They do not take control, but rather observe, guide, and encourage the soul's alignment with spiritual gravity. They dwell not in some far-off heaven, but operate among the rhythms of daily life, assigned in patterns of purpose that mirror the complexity of a living universe. They are not watching you in surveillance, but holding you in remembrance. Your name is known to them. Your tears, too. Urantia describes several orders of seraphim, each with specific ministries, each devoted to unique layers of universal progress. Some work with worlds in rebellion, stabilizing what chaos cannot dissolve. Others serve in systems of education and planetary governance. But among them are those who draw closer still, the planetary seraphim, the group guardians, and above all, the personal seraphic ministers known as the guardians of destiny. These guardians do not judge, nor do they praise. They do not force destiny, but they hold open the gates of possibility, assigned most often to those who have made a genuine moral or spiritual choice in life, a conscious decision to pursue truth, to grow. These seraphim step into proximity not only with your actions, but with your thoughts, your longings, your pain. They do not remove hardship, but they weave it into a pattern more beautiful than you can yet understand. They are not here to rescue you from darkness. They are here to walk through it with you until you find the light. Their ministry is subtle, like a hand reaching toward you just when you're about to fall, a thought you cannot trace that leads to forgiveness, a quiet nudge away from danger you'll never know existed. In a world ruled by chaos and illusion, they are stability made invisible. They whisper nothing, but everything changes when they are near. And when your soul begins to answer the call of eternity, they rejoice, not with trumpets, but with stillness, as if the universe itself had exhaled in peace. You may have wondered at some point in your life how you managed to survive the moments you thought would break you. Perhaps there was no miracle, no sudden light, no booming voice from the sky, just a shift, imperceptible but real, that changed the course of pain into the beginning of peace. Perhaps you turned away from something destructive without knowing why. Perhaps forgiveness came where only bitterness had lived. These are not coincidences. They are not random neurological flukes. In the unseen framework of your journey, these are the fingerprints of seraphic care. The guardians of destiny do not prevent hardship. They do not cancel your freedom or eliminate consequence. They honor your sovereignty so deeply that even your suffering is not stolen from you, only transformed. Their mission is not to insulate you from failure, but to elevate its purpose. Through every trial, they are present, not as saviors, but as steadying presence, not removing the weight, but adjusting your balance so that you may still walk. They hold the blueprint of your potential, even when you have forgotten it. They know your origin point in spirit and see the lines along which your soul can grow toward fusion with the divine. They do not despair when you fall asleep to your purpose, because they know what the soul forgets, that the divine fragment within you never sleeps. And as long as you are alive, truly alive in motion toward truth, they walk with you in silence deeper than speech. Their guidance is not loud, for the soul must learn to hear without noise. The spiritual path is not walked by the senses, but by resonance. And so, the seraphim speak in frequencies of presence, not in syllables. They stand near when you meditate, when you love deeply, when you forgive without knowing how. They lean in when you question everything, when you reach without grasping, when you fall into despair and still breathe again. They do not celebrate you for strength. They hold space for your surrender. And when the moment comes, when the body begins to unravel, when the breath stumbles and the limbs loosen, when you begin to let go of what you once called me, they do not grieve. They prepare. To them, death is not a defeat, but a handoff. Not a rupture, but a release. The soul, once anchored to flesh, now becomes a vessel in transition. The guardians of destiny receive it, not with fanfare, but with reverence. What they carry is not a ghost, not a shadow, not an echo, but the very essence of your becoming. It is not cold. It is not weightless. It is real, subtle, luminous, fragile, holy. And they lift it in what can only be described as an embrace that does not touch, but envelopes. Not a gesture of containment, but of transport. Not restraint, but guidance. This is what the Urantia revelation calls the seraphic transport. The moment when the sleeping soul is held within the circuits of these radiant beings and carried across dimensions, not through space as we understand it, but through spiritual reality. Time bends. Distance dissolves. The soul sleeps, and yet it is not lost. It is preserved in the arms of purpose, guided toward the next threshold of its becoming. And there, in silence deeper than memory, under the care of presences more ancient than words, the soul waits, not in abandonment, but in promise. Long after the body has faded, long after names have been forgotten and gravestones weathered by time, the influence of seraphic care continues. For the seraphim are not bound by the end of life. They are commissioned for the journey beyond. Their task is not completed in death, but fulfilled through it. The transport they offer is not the closing of a story, but the carrying of a seed, the soul, toward a soil prepared for new growth, new awareness, new becoming. Even in the mansion worlds, where the soul awakens from its sleep and stands once more in the light of consciousness, the seraphim remain. Their presence, though never dominant, is constant. They do not instruct like teachers, nor govern like rulers, but support like roots beneath the soil, unseen and yet essential. They guide transitions between worlds, assist in the structuring of progress, and remain attentive to the subtle shifts in the soul's alignment with divine reality. Though many tasks are now taken up by other orders of celestial beings, the seraphim, especially the personal guardians, stay near as witnesses and companions to the journey they helped begin. To speak of their nature is to stretch language beyond its edges. They are not emotionless, but their love does not need to burn to be true. It radiates in stillness. It carries the dignity of eternity. They have no need to be seen, no desire to be thanked. Their fulfillment lies in the fulfillment of the soul's destiny, in the freedom of the one they serve, in the ultimate fusion between the ascending self and the divine presence within, a fusion that, when it finally occurs, becomes the culmination of all their patient ministry. And perhaps that is what makes their care most divine. It is not forced. It is not conditional. It is never loud. It is the kind of presence that believes in you even when you do not believe in yourself, that holds space for your return without pressure, that honors your freedom even when it means you may walk away from the very light they carry. Their loyalty is not to your comfort, but to your becoming. Their joy is not in your obedience, but in your awakening. It is said that in the higher stages of the soul's journey, when the seraphic guardians are no longer needed, they return not to rest, but to serve others. There is no exhaustion in them, for their being is aligned perfectly with purpose. Their energy is not drained by giving, because they do not give from lack. They give from fullness, the fullness of divine assignment, the joy of sacred companionship. If you have ever felt protected when there was no reason to be, If you have ever been pulled back from the edge of despair without knowing how, if you have ever been guided to mercy in the very moment vengeance seemed justified, then perhaps, without knowing it, you have been touched by them. You may never see their faces. You may never hear their voices, but the shape of your soul bears their imprint. The rhythm of your redemption carries their pulse. And if, when your time comes, you feel no fear but only a great letting go, a falling into light, a warmth not of heat but of remembrance, that perhaps will be the moment you realize you were never alone. And in that realization, as the soul passes into the arms of its next unfolding, we arrive at the threshold of new worlds, places not of fantasy, but of purpose, where life continues not as a reward, but as an education of the eternal. It is there that we now turn. Chapter 4. The Choice of Immortality. Not all souls continue. This is one of the most solemn truths whispered across the threshold of time. A truth neither cruel nor dramatic, but radiant in its reverence for freedom. Immortality is not imposed. Eternity is not automatic. The soul is not a machine that runs forever once activated. It is a sacred flame, and like all flames, it requires both fuel and the will to burn. In a universe governed by love, compulsion cannot coexist. The soul, though encouraged, protected, and uplifted, is never enslaved, not even by divinity itself. At every stage of its ascent, it retains its power to choose, to continue toward the light, or to return to silence. And this choice is not made by words or declarations, but by orientation, a subtle and steady alignment of the inner being toward truth, beauty, and goodness, or away from it. To choose immortality is to respond to the gentle pull of spirit. It is to trust that something within you was made for more than survival, that love is not just a passing feeling, but the architecture of reality itself. It is not a one-time decision, but a pattern of response, a life rhythm that, over time, reveals the soul's willingness to become eternal. Some souls, quietly and without bitterness, turn away from that rhythm. They drift, they hesitate, and in time, they cease. The Urantia teachings call this cessation the extinction of personality, not as punishment, but as the final honoring of the soul's will. No voice cries out. No flame is extinguished in rage. There is no judgment, only release. A being, having determined, either consciously or unconsciously, that it does not wish to continue, is gently allowed to dissolve into the universe from which it came. Not discarded, not damned, simply no longer. The light returns to light. The pattern is unmade. And yet, this is not common. Most souls, however wounded, however lost, carry within them a flicker, a longing, however faint, to remain. And that longing is enough. For in this journey, desire becomes destiny. The smallest act of reaching toward the divine opens a doorway. The tiniest moment of love, even if followed by years of silence, anchors the soul to a future it does not yet understand. The soul is loved whether it chooses to continue or not. There is no anger in the universe for the one who turns away. Only grief, only a stillness that echoes with all that might have been. A space not filled with blame, but with reverence for the mystery of choice. This is the cost of love, the willingness to let go of even what we most long to save, if that is what the beloved desires. There is a sacred sorrow in the possibility that a soul might choose not to continue. It is not the sorrow of punishment or failure, but the sorrow of love unreturned, not in bitterness, but in ache. The universe is not wounded by the disappearance of a soul, but it pauses reverently as one possibility among the stars fades without echo. Yet even in this fading, something essential is revealed. the immense respect the universe holds for freedom. Freedom not just to seek light, but to walk away from it. This is not a freedom built on rebellion or arrogance, but on the quiet autonomy of the soul. To continue is always an invitation, never a command. Free will is the divine signature upon creation. It is what makes love meaningful, growth authentic, and eternity a gift rather than a sentence. The Creator could have designed a cosmos of obedient spirits, perfectly aligned and incapable of error. But instead, what was given to us, fragile, stumbling, glorious beings, was the ability to choose. And with that choice, the capacity to become more than what we were, or to dissolve into what we were never willing to become. When a soul, after all guidance has been offered, after all chances extended, turns away not in confusion, but in clarity, when it knows what it is choosing and chooses not to endure, then the divine does not resist. God does not trap what does not wish to remain. The soul is not destroyed in wrath, but released in silence. There is no eternal torment. There is only a return to non-being, to the undifferentiated sea from which all particularity was once drawn. But even here, in the possibility of finality, love remains the central force. It is love that gives the soul space to choose. It is love that whispers endlessly, even when the soul has fallen asleep to its call. It is love that lights every path forward, that waits in the stillness, that folds into every act of courage and compassion. Love is the thread the soul holds when all other systems collapse. It is the one force strong enough to anchor identity across death, across forgetfulness, across doubt. And consciousness, awakened by love, is the beginning of immortality. Not consciousness in the sense of self-awareness alone, but consciousness that becomes luminous through experience. Consciousness that has touched sorrow and still chosen grace, that has faced fear and still chosen truth. Such a consciousness becomes the foundation of the soul's survival, the clay from which eternity is sculpted. It is not what you know, but how you know. Not how you act, but why you act. The intention behind each moment writes itself into the very fabric of your becoming. Most souls, though wounded, do not choose extinction. Even in the darkest corners of awareness, there flickers the longing to belong, to become, to endure. This longing, however faint, is enough. And when nurtured, it becomes light. And when pursued, it becomes destiny. What gives a soul the strength to say yes to eternity is rarely certainty. It is rarely clarity. It is more often a quiet pull, a question asked not in words but in yearning. It is the moment when, even in confusion, something in you whispers, "There is more." That whisper is not proof, but invitation. And when the soul listens, however briefly, it begins to turn toward life beyond life. That turning is not heroic. It does not require spiritual expertise or moral perfection. It requires willingness, the willingness to be changed, the willingness to grow into something you have not yet seen, the willingness to allow love, not the sentimental kind, but the love that unravels illusions, to become the gravity that holds you. That kind of love is not passive. It is fierce in its gentleness. It respects your boundaries, even as it calls you home. Each soul that chooses to continue adds a note to the unfolding song of the universe. Not a song of uniformity, but of harmony, where each voice, each life, adds something that could not be replaced. Your soul is not interchangeable. Your choice matters. Your becoming matters. You are not merely allowed to exist. You are invited to co-create eternity. That is the magnitude of your freedom. That is the risk the universe takes on you. And yet, this freedom is never without guidance. At every stage, the adjuster of thought, that sacred fragment of God within, remains present. It never imposes but always invites. It is the compass behind the quiet, the spark beneath the silence. It is the eternal within the temporal, the infinite within the intimate. It remembers your origin even when you forget, and it holds open the door long after others would have closed it. The soul that chooses extinction is not punished, but the soul that chooses to continue is not merely preserved, it is celebrated. The heavens do not erupt in ceremony, but something shifts in the inner architecture of the universe. A being has stepped toward truth. A spark has agreed to grow, and in that ascent, something permanent is born. So much is spoken of love in abstract terms, but here it becomes tangible. Love is what makes freedom possible. Love is what makes consciousness sacred. Love is what allows a soul to vanish in silence or rise into light. It is the only force vast enough to hold the contradiction of an infinite God who will not force a finite creature to live. It is love that waits, without pressure, without despair, for the one who may never return. And it is love that lights the way home when they do. You are free, and because you are free, your choice to continue means everything. Not only to you, but to the great tapestry of becoming to which you belong. You are not made as a fragment of dust, easily lost, easily replaced. You were made as a singular note in an eternal song, and the song is not whole without you. Now, as the soul stands awake in its next realm, no longer anchored to the fears of mortality, the invitation becomes clear. Continue. Become. Awaken not just into life, but into love that never ends. This is not a command. It is a call, and it echoes gently forever. It is to the place where this call is first answered, the mansion worlds, the schools of eternity, that we now turn. Chapter 5. The Mansion Worlds, the Beginning of Ascension. There is a moment when silence gives way to awareness. Not the sudden shock of earthly waking, but a gradual blooming, like light slowly rising behind the eyes. The soul begins to stir. There is no body, yet there is form. No breath, yet presence remains. Memory returns, not in fragments, but in essence, the feeling of having traveled, of having left something behind and arrived somewhere new. This is the first day of new life. The soul does not awaken into chaos, but into design, a place not built of matter as we knew it, but of substance nonetheless. There is atmosphere, landscape dimension. It is unfamiliar, yet not frightening. The feeling is not that of being reborn, but of being reassembled, refined and clarified, as if a veil has lifted from perception. The soul now begins to sense what it truly is, without the distortions of flesh, fear, and fragmentation. This place is the first of the mansion worlds, realms of recovery, orientation, and ascension, meticulously arranged not as rewards but as necessities. These are not heavens of fantasy, but stations of soul progression, educational in purpose and sacred in rhythm. 7 spheres in total, each serving as a classroom of eternity, each refining the soul into higher coherence with divine intention. The soul does not simply arrive, it begins again. The residues of the earthly life, the burdens and blind spots, the subtle imprints of fear and confusion, these do not vanish instantly. They are not punished but understood. There is no rush. There is process. Here, learning is not memorization, but remembrance, remembering how to be whole, how to love without guard, how to think without distortion. Healing occurs not through forgetting, but through integration. There are guides, not unlike the seraphim, who walk with a newly awakened soul. They do not impose truth, but model it. Their presence is calm, deeply familiar in a way words cannot explain. It becomes clear that this is not a solitary journey. The soul is not alone here, and not only in the presence of celestial teachers, but in the presence of others. Others who have also awakened, others from distant worlds, others who lived in forms, cultures, dimensions previously unknown, yet now share the same desire to ascend. The barriers of language, race, species, and time dissolve in the mansion worlds. What remains is essence, intention, resonance. You recognize others not by their features, but by the quality of their presence, their depth of peace, their longing for light, their readiness to grow. This is not a melting of identity, but an expansion of it. You are still you, but now you are more than your past. You are more than your name. You are a soul becoming real through the fires of divine education. To live in the mansion worlds is to live without the veil, not in perfection, but in exposure. Here, the soul begins to face itself not in shame, but in truth. There is no condemnation, only clarity. What was hidden becomes visible. What was avoided is now gently encountered. This is not a punishment. It is a purification. The wounds carried from a life lived in shadow begin to surface, not to haunt, but to heal. The soul discovers that much of what it feared was illusion, and much of what it hoped was truer than it dared believe. In the mansion worlds, memory is not lost but refined. The past is not erased but re-seen, from a vantage no longer bound by ego or distortion. You witness your own history through the lens of purpose, not regret. You begin to understand why pain was permitted, where you misunderstood love, and how even the smallest kindness echoed farther than you could ever have known. This purification is not external. It is not accomplished by rituals or decrees, but by light. Light that reveals, not judges. In that light, the soul chooses to release what it no longer needs. The identities built on fear, the pride that masks sorrow, the habits formed from scarcity. There is no force here, only resonance. What is not aligned with your next becoming begins to fall away, like leaves no longer nourished by the root. And as the soul releases, it begins to rebuild, not from scratch, but from essence. Who are you without the roles, without the scars, without the armor you wore to survive the material world? What remains when the name is gone? The face is changed, the culture dissolved. Something remains, something more true than any title ever given to you. In the mansion worlds, that something is revealed, not gifted but uncovered, not imposed but remembered. You begin to know yourself not as a citizen of a nation, but as a citizen of a universe. Your identity is no longer anchored in geography or history, but in response. Your response to love, to truth, to the presence of God within you. This response, this resonance, is now your compass. It guides how you learn, how you grow, how you relate. You are no longer defined by what happened to you, but by what you are becoming in response to it. And as you grow, you find you are not alone. Around you are others who have also awakened, not only from your world, but from countless others. Their forms differ. Their memories are shaped by entirely different evolutions. And yet, there is recognition, not of the surface, but of the soul. You begin to understand that sentience, when awakened to spirit, speaks a common language. A language made not of words, but of vibration, of presence, of silent communion. There are souls who lived as beings of light on distant planets, others who emerged from denser realms of matter, and still others whose lives were utterly different in structure, but who now walk beside you with shared intent. They too are students of eternity. They too are learning how to love more purely, to know more deeply, to serve more freely. In their differences, you find mirrors. In their journeys, you glimpse your own. No soul ascends alone. The mansion worlds are not ladders for individual ascent, but classrooms for shared becoming. You learn from each other. You teach by your very presence. The walls between lives, between forms, between worlds begin to dissolve. And in their place arises something far greater. Communion not built on sameness, but on the sacred beauty of difference aligned in purpose. The mansion worlds are not a reward for belief, nor a resting place for the faithful. They are schools, living systems of education designed not to teach facts, but to shape the soul through experience. You do not graduate by accumulation, but by resonance. What lifts you from one realm to the next is not mastery in the human sense, but alignment, a growing harmony with the higher laws of spirit that govern the universe gently, invisibly, inevitably. Each world refines what the last revealed. The soul is not pushed forward, but drawn, like a plant turning toward the sun, like a tide responding to the moon's unseen pull. You do not compete here. You do not compare. You ascend through willingness. You grow through surrender. The old ways of striving are left behind, not because you were punished for them, but because they no longer serve. Here, evolution is not powered by urgency, but by devotion. The soul longs to become what it was always capable of being, not in imitation of God, but in reflection of God, uniquely refracted through your essence. The presence of other beings on the path does not distract but deepens. You begin to see that every soul adds color to the eternal mosaic, that without the perspectives of those who evolved under stars you've never seen, you would remain incomplete. Their questions sharpen your wisdom. Your pain softens their insight. You learn not only side by side, but through one another. You begin to taste the truth that was always present. We ascend not merely to find God, but to become part of how God is revealed in others. The architecture of these realms is not random. It is intelligent, tender, expansive. Each world prepares the soul for the next, not through tests of worth, but through invitations to greater wholeness. You are not judged by quotas of goodness, but by your capacity to grow in love. And as you grow, the memory of pain becomes gratitude. The confusion of life becomes understanding, and the separateness that once haunted you gives way to belonging beyond description. You're not the same soul who first stepped into this dimension. You are now the composite of all that you have released, embraced, and transcended. You do not float above reality, but dwell within a deeper version of it. And what you now begin to glimpse, not yet reach, but feel in the marrow of your spirit, is that this journey is far from over. What lies ahead is not a conclusion, but a higher beginning, a new rhythm, a new field of transformation, a new chapter in the soul's unfolding. You came to the mansion worlds as one awakening from a long sleep, fragile and wondering. You now stand at the edge of conscious ascension, no longer wondering if you belong here, but asking how deeply you are willing to continue. The call is no longer distant. It rises now from within. The soul has tasted light, and now it begins to hunger for it, not as escape, but as fulfillment, not as arrival, but as alignment. And with that hunger, with that yes echoing from the core of your being, the next stage reveals itself not through command, but through invitation. Let's go there together. Chapter 6, The Thought Adjuster, the Divine Presence Within. Before the soul ever spoke its first prayer, before it knew of eternity, before it had language for love or words for wonder, there was a presence already dwelling within it, silent, steady, patient, not watching from above, not arriving with ceremony, but already there, hidden in the quiet folds of thought, waiting for recognition. This presence is known by many names: higher self, inner guide, divine spark. But in the revelatory language of the Urantia cosmology, it is called the thought adjuster. The thought adjuster is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic idea or a symbol of the conscience. It is a literal fragment of God, undiluted, indivisible, eternal, entrusted to indwell a mortal mind for the sole purpose of guiding that soul into eventual fusion with the divine. It does not enter with the first breath, but comes later in the early years of life, once the child begins to form real moral choices, once the mind becomes capable of understanding even the faintest difference between what is selfish and what is loving. It is then, quietly and without fanfare, that the thought adjuster arrives. And once present, it never leaves, not even when the mind forgets it, not even when the heart resists it. It watches always. It waits always. It is not command. It is not demand. It suggests, nudges, offers, never forcing, but always drawing the soul upward into alignment with the deeper truths it cannot yet fully articulate. Every selfless act, every moment of clarity, every flash of compassion, every tear that arises not from pain, but from beauty, these are signs that the adjuster is near. But its voice is not loud. It does not compete with fear, ambition, or ego. It speaks below them, beneath the noise of self-interest, beneath the static of culture and memory. Its signal is purity. Its language is silence. To hear it, one must become still enough to feel the movement beneath thought, a gravitational pull towards something more real than logic or impulse. It is there, in that space, that the adjuster does its work. And what is that work? It is not simply to guide you to better decisions or holier thoughts. It is to prepare you for union. The adjuster is not a tutor. It is the seed of your future self. It does not watch you from the outside. It integrates from within. Every time you choose truth over illusion, every time you reach for love when bitterness would be easier, the adjuster takes that moment and builds from it something permanent. It constructs from your temporary experiences an immortal architecture, not for itself, for you. You are not merely guided by divinity. You are being shaped by it, slowly, silently, from within. There comes a point on the soul's long journey when the adjuster no longer walks beside you as a silent guest, but begins to merge with you as an equal partner. This fusion is not symbolic. It is not abstract. It is a literal union, a blending of your evolving personality with the eternal nature of the divine fragment within. It is the moment when your soul becomes fully real, fully individualized, fully indwelt, and inseparable from the divine. After that moment, you're no longer merely a mortal becoming more spiritual. You are a spiritual being anchored forever in God. This fusion does not happen through ritual or attainment. It is not earned by knowledge or action. It occurs when the soul and the adjuster have become so harmonized in desire, intent, and identity that separation is no longer meaningful. It is a consummation of trust, your trust in the divine and the divine's trust in your soul's permanence. That trust is not based on perfection, but on sincerity. You have proven through the 1,000 small decisions of your existence that you choose light even when it is dim, that you choose truth even when it costs you, that you choose love even when it wounds. And because of that, you are ready. After fusion, your identity does not dissolve into God. It becomes more fully itself than ever before. You do not disappear into infinity. You partner with it. The soul becomes permanent, not in spite of its individuality, but because of it. You have become one with your origin, but you have not ceased to be you. Rather, you have become your truest self, sealed by the divine you once carried like a secret fire. But not all who survive reach fusion immediately. Survival is the continuation of personality, the gift of ongoing existence beyond physical death. Ascension is the conscious participation in your divine becoming. Many survive because they have responded to truth enough to carry the seed of the soul forward. But ascension begins when the soul recognizes that it is not only loved, but inhabited, not only accompanied by spirit, but called to union with it. To survive is to remain. To ascend is to respond. You may have survived the first life with only flickers of divine recognition, with little clarity about the adjuster's whispers, with memories of intuition that were never fully understood. That is enough. But as you continue, as you awaken on the mansion worlds, as you heal, as you learn, as you remember, the adjuster begins to draw nearer in your awareness. And you begin to ask not just, what is God, but who has been with me this entire time? The question does not come in words, but in silence. It arises in the sacred loneliness that even the higher realms cannot erase. The ache that leads you inward, not for answers, but for presence. And when you finally touch it, that presence behind every act of courage, that voice beneath every moment of stillness, you will not be surprised. You will be home, and home will not be a place. It will be a realization. He has always been with you. To ask, has he always been with me, is to already know the answer. It is not a question of knowledge, but of memory. Somewhere deep in the soul, beneath the many layers of forgetting, beneath the noise of the ego, beneath the wounds of time, there is a knowing, not taught but native, not learned but remembered. He has been with you in the shadows, when you questioned everything and believed nothing. He has been with you in the joy you could not explain, in the silence that held you when no one else could. He was there in the moment you refused to become bitter, in the decision to speak truth even when your voice shook, in the morning you chose to live again when you could have disappeared. He was there when you forgave, not because it was easy, but because your soul was tired of carrying weight it was never meant to hold. He was there when you saw beauty where others saw only ruin, when you held compassion for those who had no power to repay you. He was there when you wept, not out of despair, but out of a reverence so deep you could not name it. You thought those moments came from you, but they came through you. They were the adjuster reaching from within, gently shaping your becoming, tenderly gathering the pieces of your potential into something whole. You did not see him because he was not outside of you. He was the whisper beneath your thoughts, the warmth behind your courage, the stillness between your questions. Now, as the soul steps deeper into its awakening, beyond survival, into conscious participation in eternity, the veil begins to dissolve. The voice that once seemed distant becomes familiar. The presence that once felt like intuition begins to feel like intimacy. You no longer wonder if the divine is near. You begin to understand that he was never elsewhere. There's a moment, subtle but irreversible, when you stop reaching outward for God and begin to fall inward into him. Not into a void, but into a presence so gentle it does not demand surrender, only invites it. There is no blaze of revelation, no divine spectacle, only a quiet unfolding, only the growing realization that you are not journeying toward God as one might approach a distant star. You're uncovering him where he has always been, inside your own willingness to become real. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of its deepest movement, the shift from seeking to surrender, from believing to becoming. The soul that fuses with its adjuster does not become more spiritual as the world defines it. It becomes more true. It becomes the one it was always destined to be. And in that becoming, something eternal occurs. A flame that once flickered with hesitation now burns with quiet inevitability. The soul has not been saved. It has been claimed by truth, by light, by love too vast to be explained and too personal to be denied. Not imposed from without, but chosen from within. He has always been with you. Now, you begin to be with him. And it is from this inner union, not as theory, but as living reality, that the soul prepares to continue. Not alone, never alone, but as one who now walks not behind the light, nor ahead of it, but as one who has become part of it. Let us go, then, into the next mystery, the nature of that soul which continues, survives, and now begins to ascend with conscious identity. Chapter 7. The personality, the self that endures. Even as the soul awakens to divine companionship, even as the presence of the thought adjuster becomes more intimate than breath, there remains a quiet question rising from within. Who am I in all of this? Not merely as a recipient of God's presence, but as a being, singular, distinct, chosen, existing not just in relation to the divine, but with identity of its own. This is not ego speaking. It is essence. It is the soul becoming aware of itself, not only as vessel, but as self. In the teachings of Urantia, personality is not a product of biology or psychology. It is not the sum of your traits, habits, or emotions. It is not how others see you or how you've learned to see yourself. It is something deeper, a bestowal, a gift, an unrepeatable pattern of uniqueness granted by the universal Father himself. It is not made. It is given. And once given, it cannot be duplicated, transferred, or lost. This is the part of you that survives the transition called death. Not your name, not your body, not your memories in their familiar form, but your personality, the original structure of your volition, your perception, your orientation toward truth and value. It is this that allows continuity across dimensions. It is this that permits the soul to evolve without losing itself. You do not become another. You become more deeply you. But after death, especially in the early stages of reawakening, the soul must gradually reassemble what was disoriented in the transition. Memory begins to return, not in a torrent, but in unfolding layers. You do not wake with full clarity, but with an inner recognition that builds. You remember not only what you experienced, but how you were shaped by those experiences. You begin to reclaim your desires, not desires for things, but for becoming. You begin to remember your voice, not the sound of it, but the tone of your truth. And most of all, you begin to remember your will. Will is not simply the ability to choose. It is the inner axis of personhood. It is the faculty through which you align with reality, with beauty, with meaning. It is what makes choice matter, and it is will that binds personality to purpose. Even in the mansion worlds, when much else is unfamiliar, the sense of your own volition remains. This, too, is evidence of personality, not as egoic assertion, but as the power to co-author your eternal journey. As memory returns, it is not the past that becomes your anchor, but the meaning it left within you. The emotions of 1,000 moments may fall away, but the synthesis of who you became through them remains. You begin to see that personality is not only the you that was, but the you that integrates all of what was into a trajectory. You are not a story retold. You are the story continuing. And because of this, the soul is not dissolved in the light of God, but exalted by it. You are not erased by divine intimacy. You are affirmed. The closer you come to truth, the more clearly your uniqueness becomes radiant. And as you ascend, this self, not isolated, not inflated, but whole, becomes the form through which God is uniquely revealed. To become conscious again in a world beyond the veil is not to wake into certainty, but into clarity. It is to sense the return of something more intimate than memory, the recognition of your own tone in the great harmony of being. In the early stages, you do not remember all that you were in chronological detail. Time is no longer your measure. What returns first is essence, the flavor of your presence, the rhythm of your choices, the arc of your longings. You remember not everything that happened, but how it shaped who you became. This is the work of personality restoring itself to wholeness, not by rebuilding the past as it was, but by reclaiming the direction it created. You begin to see that every decision, no matter how small, carried a signature, a movement of will that left behind an imprint on your soul. You did not just live a life. You became someone through it. And it is this someone, this particular constellation of choice and becoming, that is now gathering itself into coherence. This gathering is not mechanical. It is alive. You're not a puzzle being reassembled. You are a flame drawing together its light. What was dispersed through time and experience now converges, not into repetition, but into radiance. You feel the weight of yourself, not as burden, but as gravity. The soul, now aware of its origin and personality, begins to recognize the gift it was always carrying, the sacred right to become real. And this right is not revoked by death. It is fulfilled by it. For it is only when the body falls away that the truth of personality becomes undeniable. You're not thoughts. You're not flesh. You're not history. You are the chooser behind all thought, the voice behind all experience, the silent axis around which memory and spirit have always turned. In this space of restoration, will become sharper, not will as force, but will as compass. You're no longer reacting to stimuli, as in the material world. You are responding to meaning. What draws you now is not desire, but resonance, the pull toward truth, beauty, and goodness as they unfold in your unique pattern of perception. The soul no longer asks, "What do I want?" It begins to ask, "What am I becoming?" There is no rush. Eternity does not hurry. Each layer of memory returns when it can be held in love. Each aspect of identity reforms when it can be understood without distortion. There is no loss in this delay, only mercy. The soul grows into itself at the pace of compassion. And in this gentleness, personality finds its footing, not as who you once were, but as who you have always been becoming. And what you are becoming is not a copy of God, nor an echo of others, but a revelation of a self that only you can offer. Your personality is the lens through which God is seen from a new angle. Without it, the universe would lack a tone it was destined to sing. With it, the divine becomes more complete in expression. You are not necessary because you are perfect. You are necessary because you are particular. To embrace this truth is to begin to taste the mystery of eternal identity, not as static, but as evolving. Not as finished, but as faithful. The self that endures is not the self that clings to its past. It is the self that is willing to be refined by its purpose. As the soul ascends and memory settles into meaning, personality ceases to be a container and becomes a current. Not fixed, not immobile, but alive with movement. Always unfolding, always clarifying, always revealing more of what it is through the paths it chooses to walk. And this unfolding is not a detour from identity. It is its deepening. You are not a static self making spiritual progress. You are a spiritual becoming, discovering your own eternal pattern through every act of response. This pattern is not pre-written. It is not imposed from above. It emerges through your dance with God, the daily, sacred weaving of your will with His. In that dance, you're not absorbed. You are liberated. For what is eternal life, if not the unending adventure of discovering who you are in the light of who God is, and who God becomes in the echo of your uniqueness? The eternal self is not reached by erasing difference, but by refining essence. Personality is not undone in ascension, it is magnified. In the mansion worlds and far beyond, the soul does not become less distinct, but more radiant in its distinction. You begin to see that individuality is not an obstacle to oneness, but its necessary condition. You are not made to disappear into the divine. You are made to reveal the divine from perspective only you could offer. And so, the self endures, not as a memory of what once was, but as a living vessel of what eternally becomes. This self does not boast. It listens, it learns, it adapts, but it never forgets that it is beloved, not because of its abilities, but because of its origin. It is the child of intention, the result of a choice made by the Father of all. Let this one be. When you recognize that your personality is a gift and not a construction, everything changes. You stop trying to be worthy of existence and begin living as one already welcomed into it. You no longer measure yourself by how you compare, but by how you reflect. You are not here to compete for light. You are here to become translucent to it, to let the divine shine through the shape of your spirit, so that even eternity might learn something new through you. And in this realization, the soul begins to rest, not in passivity, but in presence. It ceases to chase identity and begins to radiate it. The ego falls away, not because it is crushed, but because it is no longer necessary. What remains is not a self improved, but a self remembered, the one that has always been there, beneath the noise, beneath the striving, waiting to be seen not just by others, but by you. This is the self that persists, the one not threatened by time, not undone by death, not shaken by transformation. It does not fear change, because it is rooted in the unchanging. It is the voice that will speak across systems, the face that will be recognized beyond galaxies, the fingerprint of God upon your soul that eternity will always know by name. You are not becoming less yourself as you ascend. You are becoming more fully who you were always meant to be. Chapter 8: Religion, Dogma, and Spiritual Truth. The journey of the soul does not begin in silence. It begins in symbols. Before we know anything of spirit, we are given stories of heaven and hell, of angels and demons, of paradise won or lost, depending on which side of belief we stand. These stories shape the inner landscape of countless human hearts. They are offered by parents, carved into scripture, sung in sacred halls, painted in cathedrals, whispered into ears at the bedsides of the dying. They comfort, they warn, they frame reality in a way that gives meaning to suffering, dignity to obedience, and coherence to fear. And yet, somewhere along the journey, the soul begins to ask if the stories are enough. Not because they're false, but because they're incomplete. The soul, once stirred into spiritual hunger, discovers that belief is not the same as encounter, that reciting truth is not the same as becoming it. What once provided security now begins to feel like scaffolding around a building that is yearning to breathe. And so begins the shedding, not of faith, but of certainty, not of reverence, but of rigidity. The soul begins to remember that the divine is not a doctrine to be obeyed, but a presence to be experienced. And in that remembering, it becomes possible to see religion in a new light, not as prison, but as passage. The religions of the world, though sometimes used to divide, were born from a single impulse: the human heart trying to articulate the unspeakable. Heaven and hell are metaphors that try to make sense of justice. Judgment was a way of affirming that choice matters. Salvation was the echo of a deeper truth, that we are not abandoned in this cosmos. The great traditions do not fail because they are wrong. They falter when they are mistaken for the destination instead of the map. Every symbol, every sacrament, every sacred word is an invitation, not to cling to the form, but to walk into the mystery it points toward. And for some, these structures remain vital, anchoring them in ritual and language that open the door to deeper encounter. But for others, the time comes when the door must be stepped through. The form must be left behind. This is not rebellion. It is reverence maturing. True spirituality begins when belief no longer needs to defend itself, when truth is no longer owned but lived. And this truth, when encountered directly, does not ask what you call God. It asks if you have made space for Him. It does not measure the number of verses memorized, but the depth of your surrender. It does not care whether you are Christian or Buddhist or nothing at all, only whether you have learned to love beyond your need to be right. There is no dogma in the mansion worlds. There are no altars carved from stone. There is only the living flame of experience. The moment you forgive and light floods your being, the instant you recognize yourself in the eyes of another soul across galaxies. Here, truth is not a creed, but a current. It moves through consciousness as music moves through air, unseen, undeniable, uncontained. This is the dawn of cosmic spirituality, a knowing not inherited but discovered, a knowing that transcends symbol without dishonoring it, a knowing that no longer divides the sacred from the ordinary, but sees all things as infused with divine presence. This is not the end of religion. It is its fulfillment. The myths did not lie. They whispered. The rituals did not control. They prepared. The words were not walls. They were doors. And now, the door is open. The transition from belief to experience is not abrupt. It is slow, tender, and often painful. There is mourning involved, though we rarely recognize it as such. When the soul begins to feel the hollowness of reciting what once felt sacred, it does not celebrate. It grieves. To lose certainty, even in pursuit of truth, feels like death. And in a way, it is the death of inherited identity, of secondhand faith, of the comfortable illusion that truth belongs to us because we have named it. But what dies is not the sacred. What dies is the shell. And once that shell breaks, the soul is finally able to breathe the air of what has always been. Not the idea of God, but the presence of God. Not the concept of salvation, but the experience of transformation. Not the promise of heaven, but the actual emergence of light from within. And that is when the soul begins to live in truth, not because it has adopted a new creed, but because it has begun to recognize the divine in its own breath. This is not a rejection of religion. It is its evolution. The forms remain available, but no longer central. They become tools, not truths. They become songs, not scripts. You are free to keep them, reinterpret them, or release them, not out of rebellion, but out of resonance. What no longer carries the vibration of truth for your soul simply falls away, and in its place arises something quieter, less visible, but infinitely more alive. Spiritual maturity is not the ability to argue theology. It is the capacity to remain present in the mystery. It is the shift from needing to be right to needing to be real. It is the humility to accept that every great religion touched a part of the whole, and that no single tradition could hold the entire sky. In that humility, the soul begins to look not for the one true path, but for the truth that appears again and again in many paths. Love over fear, surrender over control, stillness over noise, light over shadow. The soul, now in conscious movement through the cosmic realms, no longer asks who has the correct doctrine. It asks what leads me closer to God, not as idea, but as presence. And the answer comes not in words, but in the echo of peace that follows when something is true. The light that enters when resistance falls away. The opening in the chest when a phrase, a silence, a moment becomes more than itself and becomes communion. This is cosmic spirituality, not abstract, but embodied, not theoretical, but felt. It arises when the soul discovers that spirit is not localized, not confined to a book, a temple, a teacher. Spirit is the field through which all reality moves. It is the fabric of being, and because of that, you can meet God in a prayer, but also in a sunrise, in a sacred text, but also in the eyes of a stranger, in the stillness of meditation, and in the trembling courage of forgiveness. Such spirituality is not superior to religion. It is born from it. It is what happens when the seeds planted in ritual and myth finally grow roots in experience. The words may fade, the doctrines may dissolve, but the truth remains. And that truth is simple, enduring, and utterly free. You are not alone, you are not abandoned, and you are not separate from the divine. You are learning to remember what every mystic, every prophet, every true teacher has whispered since the dawn of language, that the sacred does not live in stone or law, but in the living flame of the soul aligned with love. And now you are beginning to burn. To walk the inner path without dogma is not to wander without meaning. It is to discover that meaning no longer needs to be defined by contrast, not in opposition to others' beliefs, not in defense of your own. Cosmic spirituality does not deny the value of structure. It simply no longer depends on it. It does not erase the past, but integrates it, seeing religion as the alphabet that taught the soul to speak and now invites it to sing. The soul that transcends dogma is not aimless. It is anchored more deeply than ever, not in system, but in essence, not in certainty, but in resonance. It no longer seeks salvation in an afterlife conceived by human imagination. It seeks alignment with the living presence of God here and now, in this breath, in this choice, in this willingness to be transformed. Judgment, once feared as an external sentence, is now seen as internal clarity, the truth we encounter when we can no longer lie to ourselves. Heaven and hell cease to be destinations and become conditions of being. One is the unfolding of love, the other the collapse into separation. Both are states we carry, not places we are sent. And when the soul realizes this, it stops bargaining with divinity and begins surrendering to it. There is no longer a scale weighing deeds. There is only the soul's capacity to bear more light, more truth, more love, not as reward, but as reality. In this state, there is no need to reject the old forms. They can be honored as stages. The cross, the lotus, the Torah, the crescent moon. They were all expressions of humanity reaching for the divine through symbols that time could hold. And in their beauty, they still speak. But the awakened soul no longer stops at the symbol. It listens through it, into the silence it was always pointing toward. This silence is not empty. It is full of presence, full of intelligence, full of a knowing that cannot be explained but only encountered. And in this silence, the soul learns to live without fear, to walk without comparison, to love without agenda. It learns to trust its own experience, not because it dismisses tradition, but because it has found the source from which tradition once drew. Spiritual truth cannot be owned. It cannot be sold. It cannot be monopolized by any temple or priesthood or text. It is the river that runs through all faiths, the breath beneath all prayers, the music that plays behind every moment of stillness. And when you begin to live from that place, something remarkable happens. You begin to see the divine not only in the sacred, but in the mundane. You begin to feel God not only in worship, but in washing your hands, in speaking a kind word, in remembering who you are when no one is watching. This is not the absence of religion. It is its transfiguration. You no longer need to be told how to reach God, because you begin to recognize that you are never apart. You do not abandon Scripture. You read it now with new eyes. You do not deny the prophets. You recognize the prophet within. You do not lose faith. You embody it. This is the birth of freedom, not as the rejection of form, but as the fulfillment of its purpose. To awaken, to unite, to become. The soul, now free of fear, no longer asks, "What must I believe?" but "How deeply can I live in truth?" And the answer is not written in a creed. It is lived breath by breath, in harmony with the ever-present call of divine becoming. And in that harmony, you are no longer a follower. You are a flame. Chapter 9, Toward Paradise, the Universe as a School. It begins as a whisper, not in language, but in longing. A pull from beyond time, calling not your mind, but your essence. Not toward escape, but toward fulfillment. The journey beyond the mansion worlds is not a flight from limitation. It is a flowering of truth. For even after death has passed, after memory has returned, after fusion has begun, the soul is not yet complete. It is ready, and readiness is the first gate of paradise. What lies ahead is not merely a realm, it is a curriculum, a universe structured not as a hierarchy of power, but as an unfolding classroom of light. Every system, every sphere, every world you approach is tuned not to command your spirit, but to draw it higher. You are not sent into these worlds. You are welcomed, not as a stranger, but as a child returning to a home you never consciously knew, but always carried within. From the mansion worlds you ascend into Jerusalem, the system capital. There you first begin to experience unity through diversity on a cosmic scale. Here, beings from multiple evolutionary planets coexist and serve, their differences not erased, but exalted as colors in a single song. It is no longer enough to know your own truth. You are asked to listen to others' truths, to encounter love as it moves through languages you have never spoken, and to see that no one ascends alone. From Jerusalem, the path leads to Urantia, the capital of the constellation. Here, harmony becomes more than social. It becomes spiritual architecture. The structures of these worlds are not built merely to inspire awe. They are reflections of order, balance, and a living beauty of divine intent. The soul begins to sense that beauty is not decor, but a language of the universe itself. You study not only truth, but how truth moves, how it harmonizes, how it draws all beings toward coherence without coercion. Beyond Urantia lies Solvington, the capital of the local universe. And then comes the journey through the minor and major sectors of a superuniverse, where the scale becomes vast and yet more intimate. For as you rise outward, you also descend inward. Knowledge increases, yes, but so does humility. Power increases, but comes dressed as service. The more you become, the more you are called to offer. And this offering is not a sacrifice. It is joy. It is the natural result of realizing that your becoming is not for you alone, but for the whole. And then, Far beyond the galaxies your science ever dreamed to name, you reach the outskirts of Havona, the central universe, the circle of divine perfection, eternal and never fallen. Havona is not a prize. It is a preparation. Its countless perfect worlds do not challenge the soul with suffering, but awaken it through beauty so complete that it undoes what remains of illusion. Each world is a lesson. Each lesson is love. Each love reveals more of what God is, not by definition, but by encounter. And finally, beyond Havona lies paradise, not a realm of clouds and crowns, but the still center of all things. Paradise is not location, but source. The dwelling place of the Universal Father, yes, but also the place where soul and spirit are one. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but actually, this is where the adjuster, that silent, indwelling fragment who has walked with you from your first moral choice, fuses forever with what you have become. And in that fusion, there is no more distance, no more waiting, no more seeking. You're not lost in God. You are fully found as the precise, radiant, eternal being you were always becoming. To reach paradise is not to complete the journey. It is to begin the truest one. The soul that stands before the Father does not lose itself in light. It becomes light, remembering itself as a living spark of that first source. This is the fusion, not of absorption, but of revelation. The adjuster, that fragment of God who whispered through your doubts, who never left you even when you turned away, now becomes one with the soul you have become. The two are no longer companions. They are a single being, immortal, indivisible, radiant beyond time. But this union is not the end. It is the genesis of divine personality fully realized. And with that realization comes responsibility, not as burden, but as joy. You have climbed not to rest, but to serve. For just as you were guided through worlds and errors and silence and fire, now you will guide. The soul does not retire in paradise. It expands. The fusion grants not only identity, but authority. Not to command, but to uplift. Not to judge, but to teach. You become an instrument of divine will not through commandment, but through character. Who you are becomes your offering. And so begins the cycle of service, not in repetition, but in sacred creativity. Some return to time and space as teachers, mentors, stabilizers of new worlds. Others serve in the administration of cosmic affairs, helping to coordinate the symphony of evolving universes. And some remain close to paradise itself, dwelling in silent proximity to the presence of God, contributing not through action, but through pure being. Each path is chosen freely. There is no compulsion in love. The infinite requires nothing, yet welcomes all participation. It is your nature, not duty, that calls you to serve. Even this, however, is not an end. There is no finality in divine becoming. Eternity unfolds not as a loop, but as a spiral, ever deepening, ever widening. You learn not only to reflect light, but to emanate it uniquely. You are no longer merely a seeker of truth. You are becoming one who expresses it through your presence. What once required effort becomes natural. What once seemed mystical becomes intimate. Time has passed, and with it, the need to measure. All that remains is movement, not toward destination, but through relationship. This is the nature of divine perfection. Not stasis, but symmetry. Not rest, but resonance. The soul no longer defines itself by what it has endured, but by what it now allows to flow through it. You are not finished. You are faithful. And in that faithfulness, creation expands. Not because of what you do, but because of what you are now capable of containing. the infinite filtered through the finite, made visible through a life eternally unfolding. There is no crown to wear, no throne to claim. Only the quiet and holy recognition that your journey is no longer yours alone. You walk not away from God, but with Him, co-creating realities yet unimagined. Eternity is not a place where time ends. It is the space where love never does. And in this space, you are not an exile returning. You are a pioneer, bringing the memory of time into the harmony of the timeless. You were taught that heaven was a destination, but now you see it as a direction. The path does not disappear once you have arrived. It widens, and it welcomes all who will walk it with open hearts. You're no longer ascending. You are becoming. The language of time taught you to think in terms of ends and beginnings, in victories and arrivals, in doors that open and close. But eternity does not speak that way. It speaks in continuities. It speaks in expansion without edge, in becoming without boundary. And in the fullness of your ascension, you begin to feel the truth that eternity was never waiting for you to arrive. It was unfolding through you from the beginning. You thought you were climbing toward a summit, and for a time, you were. But now you know the summit is not the end of the mountain. It is the place from which the vastness becomes visible. It is the turning point where you stop ascending and begin radiating. You become no longer a soul chasing light, but a soul becoming light. Not in isolation, but in harmony with a universe that is itself alive with intelligence, intention, and joy. The adjuster within you, once separate in mystery, now fused in identity, no longer whispers. It sings, and the song is not foreign. It is your own voice, clarified by truth, purified by surrender, amplified by the infinite. The Father does not claim you as His because you've reached Him, but because you have become like Him. Not in power, but in presence. Not in dominion, but in devotion. And still the path continues. Not because you lack, but because the infinite can never be exhausted. Even as you serve, you are being shown. Even as you teach, you are being refined. Even as you give, you are being given to. Not through reward, but through revelation. The more you offer your being to the wholeness of creation, the more you discover new dimensions of love unfolding where you thought the journey had ended. It is not motion for its own sake. It is a dance, the divine rhythm of will meeting will, of soul recognizing soul, of God expressing Himself in an endless fractal of uniqueness, and you no longer lost in that pattern, but woven into it consciously, joyfully, eternally. You are not the only one who walks this path. Others ascend, some near, some far, all bound by the same upward current of love, discovering itself. And so, the universal school is never empty. It is a living cathedral of transformation. It teaches not with force, but with the presence of truth so radiant that it calls every soul to remember what it is and what it was always meant to become. This is the gift of existence. Not that you are, but that you may choose how to be. And this choice, repeated across millennia, across systems and galaxies and realms beyond imagining, becomes your prayer, your offering, your signature in the eternal. You are no longer asking the universe to teach you. You are becoming a voice in its teaching. Not above, not below, but within. Eternity is not a prize. It is a relationship. You are not its recipient. You are its participant. And now, forever, you walk with the Father, not behind Him, not before Him, but as one who has learned that the journey is not toward perfection, but with it. And in that walk, the universe continues to unfold, and you with it, ever deeper, ever clearer, ever closer to the infinite joy from which all things arise. You are not complete. You are infinite. Chapter 10. Voices of Eternity. Earthly glimpses of the beyond. Sometimes, without warning, eternity speaks, not in thunder or visions torn from the sky, but in quiet flashes, half-remembered dreams, a sudden peace in the middle of grief. It speaks when the body lies still and the breath slows and someone seems to hover between here and somewhere else. It speaks when the heart breaks open not in sorrow, but in awe. And though few have words for these moments, nearly all have known them. They're the fingerprints of forever on the surface of time. For some, these whispers become symphonies, near-death experiences that stretch the boundaries of reason, where consciousness seems to rise above the body and witness with calm what the body could not have survived. Light appears not as metaphor, but as presence, overwhelming, warm, intelligent. Encounters with beings not bound by form, memories from a life not yet finished, messages that feel older than the self. And when the body returns, the soul is never quite the same. It has touched something that cannot be dismissed, and it carries the shimmer of that knowing into every ordinary hour that follows. These stories, scattered across cultures and centuries, often echo with striking similarities. A tunnel, a light, a feeling of home beyond comprehension, an absence of judgment, replaced by understanding so deep it heals without needing words. Some call this fantasy, others projection, but for those who have lived it, it is more real than waking. And in the language of Urantia, it resonates with a truth long hinted at, that the soul is not imagined. It is immortal, that the universe is not indifferent. It is intimate, and that beyond death there is continuity, not as ghost or shadow, but as becoming. But not all signs come in crisis. Sometimes they arrive gently, in dreams so vivid they feel like visitations, in coincidences so precise they silence thought, in a sentence overheard at just the right moment, in the scent of a flower that belonged to someone long gone, in the sudden knowing that you are not alone, though nothing in the room has changed. These are not delusions. They're the quiet vocabulary of a larger world. Intuition sharpens in these spaces, not as prediction, but as alignment, a sense that something is true before you can explain why. The inner compass flickers, and when followed, leads not just to safety, but to growth. And when ignored, leaves behind a gentle ache, as if a door had closed before you could glimpse what was behind it. This is not superstition. It is soul awareness, the adjuster within you nudging, whispering, inviting you to live not reactively, but receptively. There are also moments when the veil thins between worlds, and the presence of those who have passed becomes undeniable. You feel them, not memory, but proximity, not wish, but warmth. A hand on your shoulder that no one else saw. A voice in the silence that calls your name not from behind, but from within. You wonder if it was imagination, but deep down, something in you already knows. Love does not cease. Consciousness does not vanish. There's simply walking ahead of you now, further along the path, waiting, watching, encouraging you on. The invisible touches the visible not to prove itself, but to remind you. To remind you that you are more than what can be measured, that the walls between the worlds are thinner than they seem, that heaven is not only above, but within and beside and surrounding you even now, and that death, while real, is not the end. It is the pause before a deeper song begins. It is tempting, when touched by the invisible, to grasp at it, to chase after further signs, to demand proof, to turn what was sacred into formula. But the soul quickly learns that the more it clutches, the more the silence returns. These moments are not given for control. They are invitations, not to possess, but to participate. You are not meant to build a shrine around them, but to let them soften you, widen you, attune you to the greater music always playing beneath the noise of the world. To live in awareness of eternity is not to escape the responsibilities of earth. It is to bring the quality of the eternal into the ordinary. The deeper the soul listens, the more it becomes a bridge between realms, between hearts, between what is seen and what is hoped for. Dreams are no longer dismissed as fantasy. Intuition is no longer silenced by logic. Grief is no longer mistaken for abandonment. The soul learns to discern not just with mind, but with being. Those who have passed are not gone. They do not become gods, nor do they dissolve into nothingness. They remain souls on their own paths, progressing, learning, loving, and when permitted, they draw near, not to haunt, but to bless, not to interfere, but to reassure. Their messages are rarely loud. They arrive in subtleties, a word in a dream, a sudden insight, the feeling that you are being watched not with judgment, but with joy. You may not always sense them, but they have not forgotten you. They walk in parallel, and in some sacred hour, your paths will cross again. When the invisible touches the visible, something within us is awakened. Not just a mystery, but to mission. These glimpses of the beyond are not entertainment. They are preparation. They remind you of what you are part of, what you are made of, and what you are destined for. They do not remove pain, but they transform its weight. They do not erase doubt, but they teach you to walk through it without being consumed. The language of spirit is subtle, and it will not compete with the noise of urgency. It comes in stillness, in trust, in receptivity. The more you live with open attention, the more clearly you hear it. And slowly, the miraculous becomes natural. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. And you begin to realize that the veil was never as thick as you thought. What you called the supernatural is simply the natural, seen from the soul instead of the senses. You are not alone. You have never been. The voices of eternity do not shout. They wait. And when you are ready, they speak through others, through dreams, through silence, through joy, through grief. And above all, they speak through your own heart, which remembers far more than your mind has been taught to believe. So walk gently, speak truthfully, listen inwardly, for the universe is not distant. It is speaking always. And sometimes, if you are quiet enough, you will hear it call your name. Chapter 11, Living with Eternity in the Heart. To live with eternity in the heart is not to flee from the world. It is to see it as it truly is, a passing shape through which the eternal expresses itself. Once you have touched the deeper reality, even if only for a moment, you are never the same. You cannot unsee what the soul has seen. The illusion of permanence crumbles, and in its place arises something far more beautiful, the grace of impermanence and the freedom it brings. You begin to understand that death is not an interruption. It is a reminder. It speaks not of endings, but of origins. And in that remembering, fear begins to fade, not because you have conquered it, but because it has lost its grip on the center of your life. You no longer live in resistance. You live in readiness. Not readiness for loss, but for transformation. Not preparation for departure, but for deeper arrival. This shift does not detach you from the world. It anchors you in it, but with new eyes. You begin to move through life more gently, as one who walks through a sacred space. You speak more softly, not out of timidity, but because you feel the weight of words. You laugh more fully, because joy is no longer postponed. You forgive more easily, because you understand that clinging to pain is like trying to carry the past into eternity, and eternity has no need for burdens. Purpose becomes less about ambition and more about alignment. You no longer measure value by success or accumulation, but by resonance. What brings you closer to truth, to love, to the silent smile of the soul that knows it is on the right path. Gratitude deepens, not only for what pleases you, but for what refines you. Even pain becomes a teacher, not an enemy. Even uncertainty becomes a doorway, not a threat. You stop asking life to be different. You start asking how to be more present to what is. You begin to recognize the sacred not only in the extraordinary, but in the mundane, in the way sunlight moves across a wall, in the quiet presence of a stranger, in the stillness between breaths. Eternity is no longer a far-off place or time. It becomes a dimension of the now. Not clock time, but soul time. Not measured in minutes, but in meaning. The present moment becomes not a fleeting accident, but a temple. And in that temple, you discover the divine again and again, waiting patiently in every unnoticed corner of your life. When you live with eternity in the heart, you stop waiting for something to begin. You realize it already has. Every gesture becomes part of a larger unfolding. Every conversation a chance to bless or to bind. Every breath a reminder that life is not simply moving forward, it is deepening. You do not need to hurry anymore. You do not need to fix the whole world. You're simply asked to be present, completely where you are. And from that presence, all things are touched. The soul that remembers eternity does not float above the world. It enters it more fully. It listens more closely. It carries silence like a lamp. It meets suffering with a patience that does not rush to solve, but dares to stay. It meets joy with a humility that does not cling, but allows. And slowly, the soul becomes the space in which others begin to remember who they are. This is not a role of power, but of presence. You're not here to change people. You are here to love them until they remember they are already changed. Even the most ordinary tasks take on new meaning. Preparing a meal, tending a garden, holding a hand, writing a word. These are no longer distractions from the divine. They are expressions of it. The sacred is not above life. It is inside it. You no longer look for proof of heaven. You see it every day in the resilience of the human spirit, in the quiet courage of those who forgive, in the beauty of impermanence made holy through love. You begin to understand that death, too, is part of this sacred cycle. It is not a punishment or a failure. It is a homecoming, not only for the one who leaves, but for the ones who stay and choose to live with fuller hearts because of the loss. You do not need to pretend it doesn't hurt. Eternity does not cancel grief, but it holds it in gentleness. And in that holding, grief becomes a kind of prayer, a way the soul stretches toward what it cannot see, but now knows is real. And so you walk through life not above it, but infused with it. You carry your knowing like a breath, invisible, constant, close. You stop needing to defend your beliefs because you have become what you believe. You stop needing to argue about God because you feel Him everywhere. You stop fearing the future because you know the present is already eternity unfolding. The invitation is simple. Live as if you are eternal now. Not because you are superior, but because you are responsible. Not because you have all the answers, but because you have learned to listen for the right questions. Not because you are finished, but because you are faithful and willing to keep walking. So love more gently, give more freely, forgive more quickly, and trust that your life, exactly as it is not a rehearsal for heaven. It is the place where heaven begins. You have walked far, perhaps not in miles, but in meaning. You have not just read ideas, you have felt them. You have remembered things your soul always knew, but the mind had forgotten. This was never about belief. It was about resonance. The gentle stirring of truth when it is spoken not from the outside in, but from the inside out. You are not alone. You have never been. That is not poetry. That is reality, the deeper one. There have always been eyes watching, hearts guarding, hands ready to lift you when you fall and celebrate when you rise. Your soul is known. Your journey is honored. Your longing is holy. The soul is real, not metaphor, not myth. It is the thread of eternity stitched into your being, emerging slowly, patiently, through every choice of love, every surrender to truth, every moment you listen instead of control. It is born not in comfort, but in willingness. And once born, it does not die. It cannot. Death may change the form. It does not touch the essence. Love, too, is not a passing sentiment. It is the structure of the real. It connects what time separates. It continues when memory fades. It weaves between dimensions and reclaims what was lost. It is not limited to the living. It is the signature of God written through the heart of creation. And when you choose to love truly, fully, you are choosing to participate in eternity itself. To live with this knowing is not to float above the world. It is to root yourself deeper in it, but with light in your hands. You're not asked to be perfect. You're asked to be present, to bring the energy of remembrance into the places that have forgotten, to see the soul in others even when they cannot see it in themselves, to forgive because you understand that everyone, without exception, is on their way home. This is courage, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. This is peace, not the absence of pain, but the quiet awareness that nothing real is ever lost. This is certainty, not born from evidence, but from the intimacy of experience, the felt sense that your life is part of something vast, alive, and sacred. When you know this, not even death can frighten you, because death, at last, becomes what it has always been, a doorway opening inward. And now, before we part, though parting itself is an illusion, let us offer a final breath, not as a farewell, but as a remembering. May the stillness speak to you when the world grows loud. May the light within you grow stronger than any shadow without. May you walk through time as one already rooted in eternity. May love find you, soften you, and work through you. May the veils lift gently and the journey continue, not only after death, but now, in every heartbeat that dares to live awake. You're seen, you're loved, you are eternal. Amen. So be it. It is done. It begins again. So, if this message has stirred something within you, comment below with where you're listening from, share this with someone you love, and subscribe. We bring soul-nourishing reflections every day.